Well, hello there. I'm Ophira Edut from the AstroTwins with a special episode of AstroTwins Radio from our On This Planet series, where we focus on global issues from a human perspective with, as always, a pinch of astrology. Guided by the principle of as above, so below, we believe that what's happening with all the other planets is inextricably tied to what's happening on this planet. And with so much going on in the world right now, we also believe in the power of human stories to heal us, unite us, and shift our perspective on things that we might be seeing on the news, on our social media feeds that are causing us to feel hopeless, helpless, and disempowered. In this special episode, we're focusing on Iran and the Middle East in a conversation with a longtime friend of mine, Neda Sarmast, who has a really unique story. Neda and I first met in 2002, a prior year of the horse, interestingly, in a transformational workshop that brought people together from all backgrounds, all walks of life to discover their human potential. Little did we know that we'd find ourselves in a moment where we both helped each other find our voices. Neda, who was born in Iran and went back and forth between Iran and the United States, has a fascinating career in the music industry. She worked in music management with bands like Bon Jovi, Motley Crue, and went on to make a fascinating documentary film about the youth of Iran in 2005 called Nobody's Enemy. In the early 2000s, she also was part of a documentary of a group of people who'd been impacted by 9/11, Muslim, Jewish, American, Middle Eastern, traveling across the Sahara Desert together for 2 months. Now, Neda and I have had a long time friendship, and we've always loved the fact that our backgrounds were so different, that we were from cultures that weren't supposed to get along, and yet we did. We found that we had so much more in common than the news told us we were supposed to or even allowed to. We talk about her story, her journey between Iran and America, what she learned by traveling to Iran to make this documentary. It's also a story of friendship, but friendship that's real, not the kind of friendship that requires people to avoid hard conversations, but rather to come together to find new, empowering ways to have them. If you're watching the podcast, you're going to get to see excerpts from Nobody's Enemy, from the trailer, and from her trip across the Sahara. If you're listening, I really invite you to use all of your senses and experience Neda's work to go along with the story. We're here to give you hope, inspire you to take action. We want you to feel like you can make an impact even when the world feels like it's falling apart. All right, well, hello, everybody. I am so excited to have our second ever guest on the podcast, live from Istanbul, the wonderful Neda Sarmast. Hi, Neda. Neda and I are going to have a conversation just about parts of the story that people aren't getting. You know, our friendship goes back 24 years. We actually met
24 years.
we met in New York City doing a transformational workshop that really brought people from all walks of life together.
True.
How many people were in that room?
I think it was about 150 or 80 or something.
Yeah, we met in this intensive weekend workshop about finding what your voice in the world was. What was your contribution in the world?
And I got to tell you, I was fighting that. I was really fighting it. I didn't want to go. My friend Bob was telling me about it, and I was going through so much in my life. I was at a transition work-wise, and just trying to figure out what's going on in life. And I just felt like every time I was stuck, I would call my friend Bob. He would have the answers. He would make me feel good. He would give me some new insights or make me look at things in a different way. And I always used to say it, and he goes, well, just go to this program and just go to this program. So I was like, yeah, but I get why you did it. That was always my thing. I know everything. I know why you did it. But that doesn't mean, which was actually one of the best things that I did, because I learned that I know nothing and you can have a lot of experiences. And one of the things that I learned was actually not to assume so much, which helped me a lot, after that throughout my life, and not to be so finite on everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I may have certain views on something today, and as a human being, we live, we experience, we grow, and maybe what I thought about something a few years ago, to the core, to the things that are important to me as a core, they're the same because that's our character, that's the fabric of our personality. But when it comes into certain outlooks, to understand and to realize that maybe as you learn as you learn new things and as you live life, you may want to change your opinion and shift your opinion. Maybe you learn something you didn't know before. And that's something
Mm-hmm.
that also I learned over there.
Totally. And I remember in this particular class, it was like the second level of this program, everybody had to share. And that is so here we are from all different walks of life, but everybody has to get up on the stage and say something about kind of like what they think gets in the way of them being fully expressed in the world. And I remember like dreading it. That was like my worst nightmare. But I remember you, Netta, getting up and sharing your story about how you were born in Iran and, had to leave because of the Ayatollah's regime in 1979 that started, and how you ended up in LA working in the music business, managing these heavy metal bands. I'm just thinking, this woman is so freaking awesome. You spoke with this conviction.
It was actually a couple of years. We had moved to US a couple of years before the revolution, 70, 76, 77, a couple of years before that, and we came to New York. And it was only supposed to be a temporary stay, um, for educational purposes, and at the same time to see if my English can get better, my brother's English can get better. I couldn't speak a word of English. All I
Wow.
knew was my dad left me at the elementary school, and he's like, "I'll come and get you later." And I was like, what am I supposed
Wow.
to do? My dad took me to elementary school, and he just said, "We're just going to go talk to them." And then all of a sudden, I see him going towards the door, and I was like, "Where are you going?" Like, "No, no, I'll be back. I'll be back." And I sat, and it was in Denver, Colorado, and it was my first experience. And I had all these children. This woman came up to me, the teacher. She made me sit in the corner, and she gave me this coloring book, and she was like, "Okay, you color," while she was talking to everybody else in the classroom. And I had no idea. And then as soon as she finished, which was very weird, like it was a very, looking back now, it was the perfect school actually. The students were sitting there in their beanie bags, and then they would have these sliding doors that would change classes. And now all of a sudden it's a history class, or it's a very interesting school. And all of a sudden these kids come up towards me, and they sit around me and they start talking to me, and I have no idea what they're saying. And I was just like, turn my, was like, start painting. I didn't know what else to do.
Wow.
And this woman's talking to me, and I had no idea what she's saying. All I knew was yes, no, hello, goodbye, and thank you. And I used them in various, times. I had no idea which one was correct for what, but I just knew that those were the things that I knew in English. So somebody will say, "Who's your father?" And I say, "Thank you," just whatever those words that I knew. And they put me into this English tutoring department, I guess, with the school. And I put on these headsets, and they started teaching me
Wow.
English. And within 6 months, it was such an incredible system. And I always said one day I'm going to go back to that school. And actually, I remember the name, that it was Eastridge in Denver, Colorado. And I said, one day I'm going to go there. And I say, years later, I got paid to give lectures at universities on a commencement speech. So from that point, looking back to not having a word of English, and it was that school where it started it off. And I always wanted to go back and sit to them and just hug them and say, "Hey, this is where I started, and thank you. And look how
Mhm.
far life has, brought me from that girl who couldn't speak a word." And she kept telling me, "No, it's not shit, it's sheet, a sheet of paper." And I'm like, "Oh, I know how to do this. I can speak fast now, so I can say a shit of paper." She's like, "Sheet,
You were
these
left at an
weirdos."
elementary school too. I didn't know that, but I was almost born in Israel, which makes also our friendship unique. My parents met there. My dad was a refugee from Bulgaria. They sent me to an Orthodox Jewish yeshiva for kindergarten and part of first grade, and decided I wasn't getting a good enough education. And my mom pulled me on a sled in Michigan in the snow one February day to this elementary school and dropped me in there. So I didn't know we had that in
It was the
common
same thing.
too.
We had
Yeah,
that in common.
it's an adorable story because I can see little Netta there, but also I really do think that this is what has shaped you. And, I didn't have to speak a new language, but I went from an all Jewish, hyper religious school, and we weren't really that religious at home. We were not Orthodox, to a secular public school where there were no other Jewish classmates, maybe a couple, but um, it was mostly black, white. And then because of the Iran-Iraq war, we had a huge wave of Chaldeans, which were Christian Arabs from Baghdad, come over to Detroit. We soon had the largest Arab population outside of the Middle East. So I became a Jewish Middle Easterner in the Midwest in a black, white, and Arab predominant school.
That sounds like a party.
There were definitely moments where people were like, they did not know what box to put me in. And I'm sure that happened to you too until you got back to New York. We learned early how to navigate the nuances. This is why I wanted to have you on, not just because of the amazing work you've done that I've gotten to follow over the last 24 years and hear about, but also because these are the perspectives that I think are going to heal the world. When someone has actually experienced living between cultures and not just fitting in.
Nobody ever cared. When I came here, that conversation was a non-conversation. I don't remember the last time when I first went in, no one cared where I was from, what country, what my faith was. Am I religious? Am I not religious? Can they relate to me? That conversation came years later. So when I first went in, it was just, do you get along with this person? And maybe everyone had like a social cultural relatedness that people had with each other. But back then, nobody actually cared. The first time anybody really asked me, where are you from? Because at that point, then I learned, after like 6 months or a year, I started to slowly learn English. You're young, you pick up the language much faster. And nobody ever came and asked me. The first time someone asked was actually right after the Iran-Iraq war started in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, maybe, a few years later, 3 years later, or whatever.
Was it because their parents were talking about it at home, or?
No, actually, it was in school.
Oh, wow.
In school, it came up because somebody would say, where are you from? And I'd say, I'm from Iran. I was born in Iran. And it's so funny. A lot of people had no idea where Iran was. They didn't even know that it was part of the Middle East. They just never heard it. In fact, I will never forget one girl who said to me, where are you from? And I said, Iran. And she's like, oh my God, I've never been to Australia. I want to go there too one day. And I was just like, like those German Shepherd years. I was like, I was like, yeah, me too. I'd like to go to Australia one day. And so they had no idea where it was. And then suddenly, when they realized where it was because of the hostage crisis.
Yeah.
And it was because everybody in the news was talking. And even then, I didn't really feel too separated from people because by that time I had friends. We were talking. They knew me. I was a familiar friend in the community. Mm-hmm. They knew me where I lived. They knew me at school. We are neighbors. So, I was a safe friend that was around. Yeah. But I do remember one day in 6th grade when I went to school, and on 2 different occasions, there was a note on the table, on the desk where I usually would sit down, and someone said, go back to your homes. And I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what it was. Then I saw a note sticking in my locker, wow. You don't belong here, go out. But I got to tell you, there was so much love and friendship that even those moments wasn't a strong, telling moment because I knew it was just like somebody trying to be a bully. Mm-hmm. I didn't see it as this movement of people are going to start hating me. It wasn't that. When I would say I'm from Iran, most people had no idea what I'm talking about. So I'd say I'm Persian because Persian was an older name. People had heard it. Persian rugs, Persian cats, Persian culture. I would say, where you're from, I say I'm Persian, which is what still to this day a lot of Iranians refer to. There was a point when one day I was at this hotel bar having a meeting, and somebody asked me, they're like, "Oh, you look, where are you from?" And I said, "I'm Persian," to say, just to make it easy so they know where I'm from. And he kind of looked at me and did a little wink. Don't you mean you're from Iran? When that happened, it was a moment that something clicked for me. And I said, this guy thinks I'm hiding the fact that I'm Iranian. And that moment, I made a promise to myself that I would always say I'm Iranian, and then I would say I'm Iranian, I'm Persian. And I met people who, during the crisis, during the hostage crisis, during the war in Iran, I literally met men and women who introduced themselves to me as American or European or Italian or something or Greek. And I said, "You're Iranian, aren't you?" Yeah. And I said, "Why are you hiding the fact that and I get it. There was a fear. I get that. But at the same time, I was like, you're such a good human being. You're such a good person. You're smart. You're educated. In fact, you should say that you're Iranian.
Yeah.
You should let people know so that there is no fears, because then you're representing something that maybe they're fearful of, or maybe they hate you without knowing you, but let people know who you are, which is another reason why when someone said, "Oh, you work with rock and roll and you're cool, you're hip, you're doing this." And I said, "Yeah, I'm also Iranian, I'm American, I'm the best of the both worlds." And because I want people to say that, don't let just propaganda and news and people with an agenda identify you and speak for you when you can do that for yourself.
One of my favorite Martin Luther King Jr. quotes is that love is the only force capable of turning an enemy into a friend. And you're speaking to that familiarity. I could relate to that in my own way so much because I have this weird name. I couldn't hide either because I would have had to change my name. That it starts with the name. What kind of name is that? Where's that from? So I was so used to that, having to explain my name and then being confused for my twin sister. So I'd have to explain her name. And interestingly, I'd often get people would ask me if I was Arab. Did not know what box to put me in between my name, my features. Didn't know what the hell to do with us. But because you're kids, you also vibe, like you're saying, on personality. And you and I are lucky. You're an Aquarius with a Sagittarius moon. I'm a Sagittarius with my sun in the 11th house, which is Aquarian. So Sagittarius and Aquarius are the global friendship signs, which is why we have so much fun together too. And we're also into marketing and PR. You do that professionally. I have to do that as I've built my brand. I've learned, like, if you liken something to something that people already know that and love and that's familiar, and then introduce something unfamiliar, you work in rock and roll. They love rock and roll. You're Iranian, Persian. Oh, that's unfamiliar, but it's now linked in this friendly person who works in something that they are really emotionally connected to and love. It's like a bridge gets built in that moment.
Absolutely. I do believe in that. I do believe that
Yeah.
there is kismet, as we say. Everything happens for a reason. There's no accident when people meet each other, especially when, friendship can go on for almost 3 decades, which has been
Yeah.
at this point for us.
So you had a chapter of your life in the music industry, and then after this class that we met in, where we found courage to really bring our voices into the world.
Remember that story? Do you remember that
Yeah.
story when I walked in? For your listeners, I'll tell you the story because we're at this class and it was very intense and everybody was sitting there and there was basically coming face to face with your own identity and who you are and what your stand is in the world and what your possibility is and how to walk into that possibility. So it was very confronting for some people. And anyway, I go to the restroom and then I come back and I see everybody. I'm seeing everybody. I'm from behind everyone who's seated. And then I just see you standing in front of, like, a couple of hundred people in the middle of this room. And then
On the
the
stage.
coach, the teacher slash coach looks at you. And as soon as I walk in, they're like, "Stay right there." And I was like,
Yes.
"Okay." And I stood at the door, which was far away at the end of the class. And I don't know what you guys were talking about. And he goes, "Tell her what you just said to me, but make sure she hears it." And I was just like, "All right, what is this one about?" And he goes, "Come on, Roki, speak to Neda. Let her hear it." And then you started to speak about who you are and your existence in the world and what your
Right.
potential is and what your possibility is in life. And I had to hear it, and not only hear it, be convinced. When you said, "This is who I am, and this is my potential, this is my possibility in life that I'm inventing for myself and my life," and you said it to me, and he's like, "Neda, did you hear that?" And I was like, "No, not really." They're like, "Speak it, believe it, speak louder." So your
God,
theme for
yes.
the rest of the course was that by the end of it, like we had to go back and forth because you were so polite and you were so soft spoken that he was trying to get that out of you.
Yeah, he
And
made me
so he's like,
yell.
and he made you yell it. And then I said, "Okay, I heard it. And he goes, "Do you believe it?" I'm like, and he goes, "You got to say it again until I believe it." And then you just looked into my eyes. We locked eyes, and you
That's
said, "My
right.
possibility in my life and in my world, this is my possibility." And I looked at you and I said, "I get it.
Oh my
I see it."
God. And then I
Oh my
think I
God, I got goosebumps.
cried.
And
Those,
that was our friendship.
yeah.
And from then on, every time, and it's the
Oh my
funniest
God,
thing
that's
because
right.
I've known you all these years, you and Tali and your sister Leora. And so, you're all taking this course, and I saw the difference
Yeah.
between who you were on that day and who you became. And then I still, 24 years later, I look at you sometimes talking to celebrities. You're over there talking on television. You got your own program. You're a successful astrologer. You're on Vogue magazine. You're doing this. You're speaking. And I just laugh and I'm like, that was that little pipsqueak mouse that couldn't speak. Look at her now.
And that's who we've got to be for each other. Like, this really goes back to our elementary school experiences because what happened over the years is I started to shrink and hide. I did not want to have to explain myself. So I started to mumble. I started to speak softly. I started to just don't bother me and ask me where my name is from. And then if I tell you, like I got called, so many names. Oh, and it just didn't make sense to me. It's so much more in common with our Middle Eastern neighbors. And there was division there. I didn't know where I fit in. So that literally was maybe and is one of the most important moments in my life when that coach, I remember he was like making me yell, say it so she can hear it. You have to say hi, Netta, too. Like he made me say your name. And everybody, like the 100 people sitting there, had to like go louder, louder until I said it. And it was like, oh, but from that moment on, I
You,
had my voice.
you switched.
And then we went and
There's a
did
switch inside of you.
karaoke because
I was so embarrassed. I was like working in music business going at that time. It was like, so I'm like, "You
oh
guys
my
want to go?" You loved
God.
it. You were
We
all
went,
about the karaoke. And I'm like,
oh,
"I'm coming, but I am not singing."
I
I don't
did. I
remember.
sang Donna
I don't
Summer's on the
remember.
radio. And you went on to do your documentary out of that, Conviction and Courage. But I love your music industry stories. So let's talk about how you ended up there, because I feel like that is such a bridge to Nobody's Enemy and how you ended up where you are now, too.
Going into music, I went back to Iran for a couple of months stay to be with my dad at the beginning of the war, the Iran-Iraq war. And what I thought was going to be like a summer holiday stay turned into almost like, a year and a half. At that time, I think I was about 12 or 13. Believe it or not, I still kind of mix up some of the year. I changed like 12, 13 schools in my life. But yeah, I went to Iran for a short stay and I wound up staying longer. And it was the Iran-Iraq war. And there was a time when, you're in the middle of a war and all of a sudden people at nighttime, they had to have curtains or coverings on their windows because the Iraqi airplanes or the missiles would go over your head. So they didn't want, I don't, I mean, as I'm saying it, I'm like, well, didn't they have radars back then? But I don't know what the system was. But I knew that we had to make sure that they didn't really shut down all the lights so that they didn't see what was down there and they didn't have any, aerial view of the cities. And we had to as soon as we heard these warning sirens, we would have to shut everything down at nighttime. So I had a
Mhm.
best friend, my best friend Maheen, who was a neighbor, and she'd come up, and she was just me, and my dad was always there, but he was like, we became like sisters. And she loved music, and she loved to learn how to speak English. At this time, I speak English, so I'm trying to teach her these words. Now I'm becoming the teacher. for English. And we had these cassette tapes. It was the Bee Gees, Donna Summer, Barbara Streisand, and I think it was like when Grease just came out. So I mean, we had these cassettes, and it was Donna Summer, where I would sit there with her and look at these cassettes, and inside the cassettes we would have the lyrics. So I would sit there, lights are out, we're sitting next to in the living room, but just the two of us, and we're sitting with a candlelight, just a couple of candlelights, and I'm just sitting there reading the lyrics of Donna Summer's songs and then translating
Wow.
it to her. Or Barbara Streisand, which I love her. I love her voice. I love, her. So I was reading the music and the lyrics and explaining to her what it meant. She's like, "Oh, that's what they're saying. Oh,
Oh,
this is what
wow.
the message is." Yeah. And then one day she looked at me and she said, "You're going to work in music one day."
Oh, wow.
Because I would sing along. I would sing along to all the songs. I would sing it to her. And she's like, "Yeah." And in my mind, I heard, like, "You're going to be a musician." And I was like, it was never a thing for me. And I just laughed. But she would always say that. I came back to US. I'm now back in, at that time, Westchester, New York. And I'm reconnecting with my friends again. But at this time, I've witnessed war. I've witnessed living in another culture. The conversations were very different. My friends were all talking about lipstick and boyfriends, and I couldn't relate
Oh,
because
yeah.
it wasn't my conversation with them. And I was just like my very best friends. I was just sitting there and just kind of becoming an audience on the table, just listening to people talking and saying, like, missing my friend that I just left. And there wasn't social media back then. There was no telephones. I think once in a while in Vienna, we had to put a coin in, and the machine was like, everybody was doing this, that if you put the coin in halfway, or if you put the coin in for a minute or something, just by the time they pick up the phone, it's enough for you to say hello, but then you get disconnected. And I would
Yeah.
just call to my family and my grandmother, my friends, and I would just say, "Hi, it's me, bye." That was it.
Oh,
So that
wow.
was our connection before, what now
Wow.
is so easy, social media. So when I went back to the US, I missed that, and I miss my friends. I want to go to live in Los Angeles. Then from New York, I went to LA on my own, which is like, that's a whole different
And how old were you?
topic.
Like 16, 17 at that point?
15,
15.
15.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And basically, my educational system and how many times I've changed schools and classes, and they wouldn't accept these records, and I had to go get new records, and then I
Oh,
had to,
yeah.
miss a school year. Then I skipped a school year. It was just, there was a lot that went on. I was writing letters to my best friend. And at that time, the one day I just started seeing that the letters aren't coming. The letters stopped coming. And one day I get a call finally from my dad, who's in Iran, because he went back to Tehran. And he said, he gave me the news that unfortunately there was a bombing. And apparently, because she was such a grade A student. And the whole idea was, I'm going there. You're going to take the test. You're going to become grade A student. And you're going to be able to, come to America and go to college and go to university. We'll go together and we'll stay together, and the friendship will continue that way. So that was the whole plan, and the separation of the friendship. And my dad called and said that unfortunately Maheen apparently has died
Oh,
in
wow.
a bombing, but not through a bomb. From what I heard, the story that was given to me, which is now a bit conflicting because I've heard different versions of the story at this point. But the story that was told to me was that she actually died as a shock. Her heart stopped and she had a heart attack. She was 15 years old, and that was
Oh,
my best friend. So at this point, I'm in
it's
the U.S.
terrible.
But so that's the topic of music and my connection with her through music. So a couple of years later, I'm back in New York. I'm living in New York, and I start working at a restaurant, and I started becoming a hostess at different places. And I started working at a place called Metropolis,
I think I
Columbus. I
remember
think
that
Columbus.
place. Upper West
It was
Side.
on Upper West Side on the
Yeah.
80s, like 81st or 82nd Street.
Mm-hmm.
So you had all these celebrities. So I was very young, and there was, and I still remember, there was the owner. His name was Donald Zuckerman, and the manager slash partner, Mindy Birnbaum. I'll never forget those two names all
My
these years.
people.
So Mindy, yeah, your peeps. And so Donald and Mindy were wonderful. And I remember one day they came to me. They're like, "You're very young. We're going to turn you into assistant manager." It was a very big restaurant, very
It
well-known restaurant.
was.
It was a very trendy restaurant. It was huge, and I think it sat like, I don't know how many, few hundred people, and it was all the celebrities were there constantly. And they said, "We're going to turn you into, into an assistant manager, but don't tell anybody because you're too young, and they're not going to respect you." And I said, "Okay, great," because I was such a workhorse. A lot of Iranians have like really strong business ethics as far as like, you have to, when it comes to work and business, you don't sit back. You gotta show up, and you gotta, be responsible. And they saw that, and they said, "We're going to turn you to manager." And meanwhile, we had people like Billy Joel, Christy Brinkley that would come in there all the time, and you had all these celebrity singers. And one day, fast forward, they called me into the office and said, "We're going to Chapter 11. We're going to close down. And we just want to let you know if you have a place, we'll start, looking. We know that you're so young and you're living by yourself. So just giving you a little heads up, but don't tell anybody just yet." And it happened so fast. It was like a matter of like a couple of days later or something. And I said, "I don't know anybody." And I was just like looking. And then Mindy said, "We really like you." And she was sitting with Donald, and she's like, "We know a couple of people in the music business. Let me see what I can do. I'll make a couple of calls and see if we can find you a job or something temporarily to work in an office or something." And I was like, "Anything. I'm living on my own. I'm paying my own bills. I had no other income." And I said, "Whatever you can do, I would appreciate it." So they set me up for a conversation to go in, and I had no idea what that meant. Music business? What does that mean? How do you make money from music? Music is what people listen to every day. There's no like, there's money in that? Like, I just, zero idea. And they set me up for a meeting. I go in and I meet with the office manager. Her name was Sheila Klein, another one of your peeps.
Yeah.
And she's there. She's very nice, but she was busy. And it was a small boutique office. There was about 7 people that worked in the office. And they were looking for a receptionist. And so I sit there with Sheila, and she said, "Okay, well, that was nice. Okay, nice meeting you. We'll call you back." 2 weeks later, I haven't heard from her. I called, and she's like, "Okay, give me some time, another week." And I just said, "I'm so sorry, Sheila, Miss Sheila, I'm so sorry. I need a job. I need to make money, and I really, really need this job. If you're looking for someone still, give me, I need this opportunity." So another week or two went by, and then she calls me up. She goes, "Okay, come in." She goes, "Here's the deal. You're too young. You've never worked in the music business. You've never worked in an office. You don't know the system. You don't know how anything works. I heard that you're really good with talking, and I heard that you're good on the phone. We need a receptionist, but you don't know anything, and you're too young." And I said, "I need to pay my bills, and I need this job." I said, "Give me a chance, and I won't let you down." That was something I'll never forget. I said,
Wow.
I just went out. I just went out and said it. I said, "Give me a chance. I won't let you down. And give me a couple of weeks." So she said, "Okay." She calls me and she goes, "Here's the deal. Nobody wants you to work here. I'm your only ally. I'm going to give you a 2-week chance. The bosses don't want you here. The assistants don't want you here. The agents don't want you here because you're too young and you've never worked in an office before." I said, "I'll prove them wrong. You give me a chance." She goes, "Don't shame me. Don't make me regret hiring you." And she said, "Also, any questions you have, you come to me. Don't go to anybody because they don't want you here. They're not going to help you. Come to me and me only." And I said, good. The whole time I was like, what's the big deal? It's answering phones. I didn't know what the big deal was because I didn't realize how big of a company they were, how popular, how successful they were. I had
Can
no
you
idea
say what the company was?
The company was called ITG, International Talent Group. And there was 2 bosses there. It was Wayne Forte and Michael Farrell. Both of them were agents. And at that time, it was a booking agency. So we are the ones that booked the tours, the global worldwide tours for David Bowie, Pink Floyd, Duran Duran, Depeche Mode, Sade, Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins, on and on. There was, a lot of Pet Shop Boys, yeah.
Small act.
Small acts, and then later on, mostly British pop. A lot of them were British pop. I think we did something with Australian band. It was called Aha, I think, but mostly British pops and The Cure. I had no idea how big they were, but a small boutique company. So I went in, and I guess maybe it's good because I didn't know. In my life, not knowing plays a big
I was
favorite
gonna
for me
say, I
throughout
think your entire life primed you for this moment. You're like, you dropped me in a school. I didn't speak the language. I figured it out. I can figure this out.
Not knowing something and walking into it always catapulted me to something better. So I went in, and for 2 weeks I was asking questions from Sheila, and she was a very funny, like amazing, beautiful woman in her early 30s. And she would just come and I would ask her questions. She's like, "Oy vey, oy, I can't believe she's asking me this question. Oh." So she's like, and I'm like, "What is this fax machine?" And she was
Oh,
explaining, she's like, "Oy vey, you don't know a fax machine." I put this document here, and at the same time, it shows up in Australia exactly as it is. She's like, "Oy vey, I can't believe it." She's like, "Please don't say this to anybody. You know, I'm gonna get fired for hiring you." And then one day she comes to my on my desk and she sees this the file folders where you had the little labels.
yeah.
So I'm over there writing someone's name and address on that little thing to stick. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, this guy Joel just asked me." He said, "Add a label with the address on it." And I was trying to put the entire name and address on a file folder sticker. And she's like, "Oh my God." She goes, "No, no, no, come here, come here." She goes, "This is the label. It's this big." Funny things like this. 2 weeks later, my time is up. We're at my very first concert ever, which was for The Cure. I'm there, I'm just watching, I'm just amazed at the live experience, the tours, the sound. I mean, I love music as it was, and it was just a different world. And all of a sudden, I saw everybody gathering around me from the office. They all had like a champagne glass in their hands, and they said, "Okay, everyone, welcome to the team, our new latest team member, Neda. Welcome,
Oh,
welcome, welcome to ITG." Sheila just gave me a hug, and she's like, "Don't embarrass me." And I said, "You gave me a chance, and I'll never ever forget that." And for a long time, I would sit at the office way after everyone had gone, and I would learn what the telex machine was, how the telex machine worked. I was reading contracts between the agents and the artists and the managers, and understand what the legal contracts were, and understanding what the AFM was, the American Federation for Musicians, learning that, and just teaching myself over, late
mm,
night in the hours to learn, because honestly, I wanted to learn, but I also I wanted to make Sheila proud. I didn't
hmm.
want her to think that she made a mistake by hiring me. So I wanted to hurry up and catch up. And years later, one day, years later, I asked Sheila and I said, "Why did you give me a chance? Looking back, I really didn't know anything." And she said, "First of all," she goes, "there was just a connection that I had with you. And second of all, I looked at you and I said, one day this girl is going to give me a job." And that's what happened actually. Years
Really?
later, she was out of the office. She was at another location. They had shut down or closed down. I was at a different location. I've made a lot of contacts at this point. I moved on to management, which was, that's another story.
Yeah, you managed some impressive bands.
It was at ITG. I was at ITG when I started. I met this girl, Vicky Rovner, who was working with the management for the Scorpions. And I liked the way she was talking. She was very, the business and the conversation was different than the booking agency conversation. So I was listening to her and just curious. And Vicky and I hit it off. And she was just in that office temporarily. And then later she was going to move to another office. I got a call and they said, "They need somebody here at the office here at the management office, would you come?" And I actually turned it down, I think, a couple of times because I was so comfortable where I was. I went in one day and they said, they're working with this new up and coming band from New Jersey, and they were getting a lot of things were getting busy, and they needed an extra hand at the office, and they needed somebody else there, starting out with the phones, and then moving on to other aspects later on as being like rep, artist rep, and all that. And I didn't know what it meant. And then I see these pictures of this guy with like a lot of big frizzy, big hair, handsome guy. That artist was Bon Jovi. And that's how I said, okay. And I said, let's go give out management a try. And for the next several years, I worked in the management office with artists like Bon Jovi and the Scorpions. We also had Skid Row. We had Motley Crue at that time. When I got the call and I was able to actually repay the trust that she gave me, and she gave me my first chance in music. I was able to recommend her for a job that she was a good fit for, and she got the job. She was like my big sister slash music mom. Sheila passed away from
Oh.
breast cancer, unfortunately, at a very young age. So she's been
Mm.
gone for many years now. But to this day, I'm still, a lot of things that I do, our code word or whatever it was between us is still in play. Sheila's still in my heart, and I still appreciate her, and she's still kind of guiding me just from another location.
After September 11th, Neda had an awakening. It brought her back to memories of war-torn Iran in the 1970s and 80s and reignited her desire to be a change maker, to create new dialogue. She decided to lean into her entertainment background and go make a documentary called Nobody's Enemy about the youth culture of Iran. You're at this pivot point moment in this workshop. You've had your success in music through this fascinating way that you ended up there. You've learned how to navigate between Iran and the US, but maybe you're feeling more American at this point in terms of the culture where you've been. And then comes the chapter where you go back to Iran and decide you're going to go and make a documentary about the youth culture. When you went back as a teen and were listening to music, to where it was in 2004, 5, how had that progressed?
For years working in music and just living in New York and just being busy, it
Mm-hmm.
was the music business and it was a fun industry, but it was, you worked hard. And I could say, as fun and as great as it was, our working hours and our commitment was probably more than anybody that worked regular 9 to 5. It was not unusual for me to go to the office at like 9 in the morning and sometimes stay there till 8 at night, 9 at night, sometimes till midnight, sometimes just crash on the couch because we're dealing
Mm-hmm.
with time zones in China, Japan. There was a shower, at the office there. As a result of working so much and being so busy, I didn't really get a chance to go out and connect with other people than work friends. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
was work friends. I wasn't connected to, I didn't know any Iranians. I never knew any Iranian community things. I didn't even speak any Farsi at that point. That's been years since I spoke Farsi at this point. All my friends were just, my friends from New York and the music business. So I didn't really have any kind of a connection that much to Iran, other than I could understand when someone spoke Farsi, um, as long as there was not big words. I could understand what they were saying, but I couldn't really come back with a good conversation. I sounded very elementary. My Farsi was very, very elementary in speaking, and it wasn't, a major focus for me. I was just like a young woman in New York working in the music business and traveling through states and countries and having a great time and working in business. That was my life. But I got tired of it after years because I started so young. Now I've been in it for years now, and I've been there, done that, heard it, and it wasn't exciting anymore. In fact, I
Mm-hmm.
remember what happened to me was I was on a private jet on our way to Cannes, and I think it was the Hilton sisters, and then we had Bobby Brown, the makeup artist, her manager, and the owners, and all these like celebrities on this private jet. And we're on our way to France for a big party and I was working at that time with a friend of mine, Jill Siegel. She was doing PR for an artist. And so I said, okay, so I went to France with her as this artist was going to do a performance. And I'm sitting at on the airplane in a private jet with food, service, celebrities all around me. And I'm looking out the window and I was just saying, I am so bored.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation was boring me. The topics were boring me. I was just looking and I just laughed and I said, God, anybody else would love to be at my seat right now. So many other people belong here at this seat. And at that moment, something switched again and I said, this chapter is over. I don't belong here. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to have these conversations. I want to do something different. And I didn't know what that was. That was the reason why I went to these courses that you and I
Yeah.
met at,
And you kind
because I
of
was trying.
thought about this for a long time. I remember you were like, I don't know what I want to do next. But being the Aquarian, you couldn't stop thinking about it
Oh my
until you
God.
landed on it.
I'm still the same way. If any major move takes a long time for me as an Aquarius. I overthink it and I think it and I come up with every single angle of what could go wrong. How, didn't know what was next. My entire, as you remember, my
Hmm.
identity was this business. For years
Yeah.
now, I've worked in not just the music business, but I've worked with the biggest names and the biggest artists around the world.
Well, that must have been a lot to think about. The logical side of you is like, were you crazy? Why would you throw that away? You've achieved so much. How
Yeah.
can you turn that into the next thing? But as it turned out, that happened.
There's probably somebody right now listening to this, and they may be at a point in life where they don't know what's next. That time of not knowing, which is where I was at, it was difficult because, we really were the biggest badass music, management company in the world at that time. Everybody
Hmm.
respected us, and we were a very small core group, and it was very known by everybody that not everyone gets a chance to work at this company. You don't get a chance to go sit with the head of Universal or, Sony Music and all these people in meetings and have them, you've got, the Clive Davises of the world, and back then it was Ahmet Erdogan. Funny because I'm in
Yeah.
Turkey now. Um, so it was very obvious that this is not a job that you leave. And if you do, if they turn their back on you, then who are you? What is my identity? If I'm not this company, if I don't have this big name, this big banner of company behind me that is backing me up, and doors would open for me. I was Miss New York, every single club, bar, private lounge, every event, every concert, they knew me, that I'd walk in, I'd call anybody on all these exclusive places that nobody had even access to. I would call them in the last minute, get this person on that list, bring them here.
I
You
remember going to
know,
the Plaza Hotel with you, like, oh, I'm sitting at the bar with Heather Locklear because you had managed
yeah, I
Motley
forgot
Crue
that.
with Richie Sambora. It was like
Yeah,
2002
yeah,
or
yeah,
three. And she's
yeah.
like, oh, hey. And then we went up to her room at the Plaza. And I was like,
I just remembered
wow.
that.
Yeah, I was like,
I
holy
just
crap,
remembered
this
that.
room is huge.
If that's who you are,
Yeah, how do
and
you
if you
leave
know, and
that?
and the office, they could see it because I didn't have that same feeling. I didn't have that same energy. I didn't have, they could see that I was just not happy, and it was just, it just came to a place where I needed to go figure out what's next for me because I started at such a young age, and I wanted to, and I didn't really have that much of a youth because I was just constantly working all the time. Where everybody else was out there having a good time, I was too, but it was for business, it was for work. And
Yeah.
because I was so always told that you're too young to do this or that you don't have the experience, I always felt, and because I live by myself, I always felt that I had to keep it together. I can't mess
Hmm.
this up. If I mess this up, then I'm really going to crash badly. I can't let this go wrong. I can't mess it up.
Hmm.
Also, I can't make my family, my dad, my mom worry about me. I want them to know that I'm okay so that they don't have to worry about me. So I was always something behind me, just keeping making sure that I was doing the right thing and I was working, I was busy and being responsible. So, but
Hmm.
I really, I wanted out and I didn't know what that meant. And I was scared of losing my connections. I was scared
Yeah.
of losing my friends. I was scared that, I would no longer be Neda who, because I was always Neda McGee, Neda this, Neda, all my
Hmm.
friends were music business people. And so it was kind of like you're part of this clique and a very high level group of, like A-type personalities
Yeah.
that you trusted each other and you knew each other. So who am I if
Right.
I'm not that? Who am I if I'm not the music person again? Or the music, who am I if I don't have these people to go to or to speak with and and that was a very tough time. And I couldn't
Hmm.
figure it out. And that's when my friend Bob told me about these classes and I went in to try to figure out what is my identity, what's next for me because I'm not happy, and what would that look like. At that same time, meeting you and trying to understand what my potential is, what my possibility in life is, what that would look
Hmm.
like, and talking to people and really feel that I've got this amazing group of people that'll remind me who I am, even at times when I forget it. And that's when you have strong, powerful friends that love you around you, you being one of them,
Yeah.
because we're going to have moments when you fall down. They're going to have moments when you doubt yourself. And my friends were this amazing, powerful group of friends who really cared for me. And we were there for each other just in case if I slid down, they wouldn't let me. They were like, you've forgotten who you are. we haven't. We're not going to let you forget. This circle of influence, you were there. You were 100% there for a big portion of that. So this circle of influence allowed me to feel comfortable to go and explore who I am and what's next. At the same time, we're in New York and it's 9/11,
Yeah.
and the buildings come down, and of course life and the tragic and politics gets on the news again. And I was constantly watching the news. I was a huge news junkie back
Hmm.
then. I still am, but a lot more different. I go to a lot of alternative routes now to get the real news. But back then, I was just glued to the TV. It was CNN and BBC, and just see what's out there. Listen to the news. 9/11 happens. Politics comes up. All of a sudden, people are again, just like back when I first came to
Yeah.
America. I started conversations came up. Are you a Muslim? Those
Right.
conversations came up again. And I started to now, as a different person, a few years older now, started to remember those days. And I started to see the shift in people that trust. If someone's from the Middle East, are you Muslim? Are you Jewish? Are you Christian? What level Muslim are you? What level of Christian are you? What kind of
Hmm.
Jewish are you? Are you a Zionist? Are you Jewish? Are you a real Jew? Are you a fake Jew? Are you this? All
Hmm.
these topics would come
Hmm.
up. All these things that would, like, I hadn't heard any of this stuff for years.
Yeah.
And I remember watching CNN, Christiana Amanpour actually, who's also British Iranian.
Iranian. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I really enjoyed her. I always thought that she was very professional. I loved listening to her with her smart British accent. But it was a program, it was like a three-part series, basically doing a deep dive in the religions. One of them was like a 2-hour series about, Islam. The other one was Judaism. The other one was about Christianity. And I remember when I was watching the Islam portion, I was listening. There was a lot of truths, a lot of things that were not being said or not being shown or highlighted. And I kept thinking, well, how come they're not saying this? Or, I felt like there was some fear mongering going on. I
Hmm.
felt like there were some omitment of some characters and personality. And it was trying to become more sensationalism. And as I was watching it, I kind of turned around. At the very end, I heard all this. At the very end of the program, and I don't know to this day if it was her control, complete control, or just editing or whatever it was, but the story had its look and feel to it. And at the very end of the story, it's like, well, it is important to say that not all, Muslims and not all, Islam does not represent this, and there's a lot of peace-loving people and blah blah blah. So, so that was included in there, but it was a very short couple of minutes at the end of a long segment. And I remember sitting there and I'm like, God, I've been talking and I see what's happening in Iran and all these young people there. And again, um, something clicked inside of me and I said, well, I work in entertainment. I understand the power of entertainment. What better way to talk to people and to let them know, because, things were getting serious again. And then now we're about to go to war with Iraq, and now Iraq and Middle East and Islam, this and that, all these topics came up again. And I said,
Hmm.
well, I've worked in entertainment. I understand the power of entertainment. And I wonder what I can do right now with this. It just called me.
Yeah. It
It
just
just,
was a
it just,
moment you were like, how can all of my backgrounds come together? So, what did you see going on with the youth in Iran? You were in New York at this point, but obviously your family and friends, and you have a connection there.
it was 2005 at this point. And in 2005, I make a production partners with Chat the Planet was the name of the company, this production company, and they partnered with me. And they were all about peace and dialogue with people, and they were working on this dialogue with the Iraqis and the youth people. And so they gave me 15 minutes. I said, listen, I'm not a filmmaker. My intention is not to become a filmmaker. I don't know anything about the world. I just want to tell a story that a lot of people aren't hearing right now. So I'm thinking about making this documentary and I need some help with you guys. And the 15-minute meeting turned into 3 hours. We became partners. I said, I'm going to go to Iran. I don't know what and how, I don't know what it is as far as technicals and cameras and this, but my intention was to show the youth culture of Iran because I saw that they are young, they're vibrant, and they don't have any beef with anybody. Westerners, they don't care if somebody is Jewish or Christian or American or European. They have no beef with anybody, and they're not being hurt. And the people were constantly showing the news. The talking heads were creating this fear monger about Iran and the Middle East and Iranians. And I just said, well, it doesn't make sense. The people that I see, the people that I know, don't say this. They don't act like that. They don't feel that way. And they're not the minority, they're the majority. How come the majority of these young people or the people are not getting their voices heard? And when it does, it has to be something with fear mongering or separation of how we differ from each other and why they think this way. And I got really upset. And I said, okay. And then there were war drums with the potential of something happening with Iran.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, I remember the Iran-Iraq war. I remember what happened. I remember people dying. And I remember my friend died in that. And I said, I was too young back then. Now I can play a role in it. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know how or what. But I knew that at this point, my upbringing has been with entertainment. And I said, I'm going to fight this narrative with its own sword, which is entertainment. If they're going to show one side of it, fine. I'm not saying it's right, wrong, valid, invalid, whatever. It's not the full picture because I'm not seeing it because I'm one of them and I'm not seeing the full picture. I have a chance now to go show the other side, which was the heart and soul of the people, the Iranian people, the young youth. And I went in, it was at the beginning of Ahmadinejad's elections, actually, which was, again, I didn't know anything. Not knowing helped me. Yeah. Later on, they're like, I should have been, this could have happened to you, that could have happened to you. You were, if they arrested, and I did get stopped and pulled over a few times, and I'm like, oh, that's it. I was scared. I was really scared about, but I kept saying, my agenda, my intention is to show the youth culture of Iran, to show how kind they are, how smart they are, how they're not your enemy, they're your friends. And so when I said the Iranian people, these young people, they're nobody's enemy. And so that became the name of the documentary, called Nobody's Enemy, the Youth Culture of Iran. And I went in and I went back and forth about like 2-3 times.
You went with how many people?
My friend Sarah, who went there, she was an artist, she's a very successful artist, Sarah Rabar. And we went in together. She was going to do video and cameras, and she was doing her own artwork. And so she was going to go anyway. I hired a few people there just for camera work and audio stuff. But it was very small. It wasn't like a big thing. It was just me, a little schmo that's just going to go to Iran and just sit there and get a story.
And how did you find the people to interview?
I said, I'm going to go there and I'll find them.
Okay.
I didn't have a script. I didn't have an idea. I didn't have none of that. I just knew that I'll be guided. And It wasn't like I didn't have a home for it. I didn't have a placement for it. It wasn't. I said, let me just go get the story and it'll reveal itself. I was in Tehran. I started talking to people in the streets, and some people didn't trust me. And they're like, "What's your intention? Are you gonna show us in bad light, or do you have a political agenda with what you're doing against Iran or Iranians?" And a lot of people didn't trust me at first. They were scared because they didn't know if I would. This was a big thing. They wasn't sure how I would edit their conversation to make it look like a message that wasn't theirs.
And what kind of access at that point did the youth have to American or Western entertainment and pop culture?
They had access to all of it.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised because it was restricted and they had sanctions and they've been cut off from the world. Yet they were completely up to date in fashion, in music, in understanding with the film world. Everything was done underground.
I think I remember you telling me that. Yeah.
The underground in Iran was really was actually the mass market because everybody, they were giving videos and CDs and music. And this is, just when Apple came up with MP3s, they were very connected. A lot of the people that I met when we talked about books or music or films, they really analyzed.
Yeah.
Where I would just feel it. I was like, listen to the music and feel it. Like we would go with the vibe, we would go with the feeling. But Iranians, it was interesting. The difference was they dissected the song. First, have to listen to it, then they'd have to translate it, then they'd have to understand it. Then, if they didn't understand the isms, then they would go and try to find out what that meant, like the cultural aspect, the pop culture. Then they'd have to go and find out the bio of who it is. And then they would sit and try to come up with the meaning, because Iranians are poets. It's not unusual to like get a taxi ride or go buy tomatoes and the guy answers you with like a poetry verse. It's just in their blood. So,
not happening here in New York, sadly. Who ended up through a series of all the twists and turns, meeting someone who was thought of as the Iranian Tupac.
What happened was we had a booking to speak with a studio and a singer, and at the last minute they canceled. They got scared. They thought that they didn't know who I was, and I said, listen, I work in the music business, because I wanted to hear and see what's happening in the music vibe naturally. Yeah, what's it like? Of
course.
And there was a very vibrant music scene, and I was just curious about it. That someone had introduced them to me, and they canceled at the last minute. So I had, the camera guys. I had, everybody was there, and I said, all right, let's go have some cello kebab. We'll have some kebab and rice, and I guess that's a wash. We're not going to do anything, and we were just going to go and sit down. And then the sound guy, he called a friend of his, and he goes, well, I've got a friend of mine, and he's a rapper. And he's in the studio right now with his, then partner. And he just said it's okay. You're allowed to go in and record them and talk to them. And I was like, really? And then I looked at my friend and I was like, rapper? I can't imagine Persian hip hop. But we had everybody, and everybody was already working. So we went into the studio, and he opened the door, and there was this young guy with his partner, Mita, was in the studio, and they were working on a song called Bam, which was about the earthquake in Iran that had killed almost 50,000 people. He was just starting out, and he was so open and honest in front of the camera. I started to ask questions, and it's funny because when I look back now at those answers and the questions that we had, I really couldn't speak Farsi. My Farsi was very bad. Half the words I was using was English, and he was trying to understand what my question is. And so it was funny to look back, but I met him. I had the camera on. So the very first minute that we said hello to each other and went eye to eye was on camera. We had a long talk. He answered everything. He was very fearless. He was very open. He said everything that he wanted to say on his mind. He was very evident that he really cared about his people and the image and the culture. So I said, oh, crap. Now we're going to have to listen to his music. I'm like, I like the guy. He's a really nice guy, but now he's gonna go downhill, my image. That now I'm gonna have to listen to his music. So they're like, all right, let's go listen to the music. They turned off the lights and they put on the music, and he starts singing. And then all of a sudden, I just looked around. I was like, what was that? It was incredible. His flow, his voice, the lyrics. So it was Persian poetry. He's writing his words in poetry, putting it on Western, beats. Mm-hmm. And it just flowed. The flow was incredible. And I looked at my friend, and I looked at the camera guy, and everybody, I was like, he was wiping tears off his eyes. And I'm like, well, they're Iranian. They grew up together. If he's moved as much as I'm moved, then this guy's something. So I became friends with him, and I said, look, I don't know anything about Iranian music. I don't know anything about the music business in Iran. I don't know. And I said, but I come from a lot of training, and I've worked with a lot of artists in my time, and I see a star when I see one. And I said, you are an absolute superstar. And I said, I don't know what you're doing, but just continue and just go for it. And I was just amazed by him. I left, and then his partner called me up. He goes, we have some more songs if you want to listen. And I was like, sure. I don't know what I could do, but sure. So we met again. We listened to more music. One after another was great. Some better than other. But the guy had something. And I went back, and I had also featured this really smart, brilliant student. And she was very smart. She was a female student. She was outspoken. So I decided to use Yas was his name, is this person I'm talking about. His name was Yasser, professionally known as Yas. And I went back and I started to look back at the footage, and I said, these two were really interesting. I want to feature them. So I take it back to the production office, and Lori and everybody says, like, who's this guy? And I'm like, I know, isn't he good? He's so good. They're like, yeah, like, can you be in touch with him again? I said, yeah. And they're like, well, let's focus on him. And I said, he's got a really interesting story. So I went back to Iran featuring him, featuring the woman, and just kind of, trying to get more footage, more B footage, B rolls. And then that's how the more I got to know Yas, and I really said, look, I said, I've talked to some people, they listen to your music, and they also really like it. I'll try and help you. I don't know how. I don't know what it's supposed to look like, but I'll try and help you out and just get your voice out there and, use some of my training to see what we can do. I don't even know. How do you make money? How do you do business with Iran? And how do you even get your web? Persian hip hop, it was new. Nobody was doing it. No one took him seriously because they were laughing at him, saying it's just like you're just reading the newspaper on beats.
And didn't he
So
find it because his dad brought like a CD back from the US or
yeah,
something from
yeah,
Tupac or something like that?
yeah.
Yeah.
He has a very deep voice. That's why they started to call him the Persian Tupac. They
They're
kind of
both
took on,
Geminis, as
and
it
they're
were.
both born at I think the same day, like one day
Mm.
apart. And he had very social, cultural lyrics and music. He never used profanity in his songs. He really was just telling a story, his life story, his problems, his issues, and people reacted to that. But yeah, so that Nobody's Enemy wasn't even fully finished yet. Color
Yeah.
corrections, the rights and the licensing and all this stuff was still. When I was invited to go to DC to speak about the subject matter at a conference. And after the conference, I showed a couple of small clips. After the conference, there was a line of people that came to me that had questions, and there were student body leaders who wanted to invite me to their university to speak and
Mm-hmm.
to show the film. I said, well, the film was not finished yet. They're like, it doesn't matter, just come and it's fine as it is. And I said, well, I'm not here trying to be a filmmaker. I'm not trying to get an award on this. If this is the opportunity to get the message out, let me do it. And that's how I got into the world. And lecture agent found me, and he started to talk to me and rep me, and he started booking me at these universities and conferences, and to show the film, to talk about basically how entertainment can play an important role towards cultural diplomacy and
Yeah.
how we can connect people. And I started to realize that through these dialogues with people, there's a lot of fear. A lot of people had anger or fear towards Iran and Middle East, and that broke down. And they started to say, "Oh, they look like me. They talk like me, or they're doing music just like my music."
You're being really modest, but Yas has millions of fans, and you and Yas created basically the genre of Persian hip hop. He's got fans all over the world, and that's because of your documentary. Because you said there was a vibrant music scene, but it was really underground. It wasn't like publicly out in clubs and performance spaces, right?
No,
Everybody
it
had to
was all
like
underground.
secretly gather to consume the culture. I went with you to London 20 years ago this May because you were on a panel and you were screening it. I remember being really moved by seeing the screening of it. All we ever see about so many cultures is the terrible news about the government, never about the people. So fast forwarding over the 20 years, like how has the youth culture, to your knowledge, in the arts and entertainment been changed by this or developed that you've seen?
I mean, it's led by the youth, right? It's always the
Mm-hmm.
youth that they're fearless, they're courageous, they have energy, they're believers, they have hope about the future. So all movements really start with the youth. I realize that this is where, things happen. I remember when I was actually in the bedroom sitting there on the computer, and I remember the first time I was able to put Yas's music out on this internet thing. I called him up and I said, Yas, I said, 3 or 4 people have downloaded your music. Strangers that don't know me or you. They're just random people. And then, Yas, 15 people just downloaded. Oh my God, it's up to 300 people. Iran is fantastic. They are a dream for marketing and promotions, in the American system. Because what you
Mm-hmm.
would spend so much time and money and effort to promote something, Iranians can do it within 24 hours. Hate something, they really hate it, and everybody in the country will know. But if they like something, everybody in the country will know fast. It'll get out there. So it was very fast from when he just had his very first download to all of a sudden a few thousand people to now he's writing this other song to, hey, what's going on? Hey, who are you? Then I started making social media. Back then we had MySpace, and then we were working on Facebook, and so things escalated very fast, and he very quickly became a well-known name. But because he was an underground artist, you're not sanctioned, you're not allowed to put your music out, record company. There's no copyright laws in Iran. So anybody can come and just take your music, play it, put it somewhere else. And you're not, your work, your intellectual property is not really protected. On top of that, we had to play it under the radar, because if it gets too big too fast, it could bring trouble to his doorstep. It was so cool and it was so raw and authentic, but you couldn't make any money off of it because you can't sell anything. You can't go on a concert. You can't monetize off of it. Back then, there was no monetization off of, YouTube or all these other places. It's still nothing. Even the monetizations now for these artists in Iran right now, they're not really making anything because their IP addresses is involved in Iran, which is a country that's under sanctions. They can't make money. They can't have banking systems. You don't have credit cards to buy their music to support them. This has been a huge focus and upset for me for many years. I've worked with the biggest names in the music business, and here I am now managing one of the biggest names in the, music business in Iran, and yet he should have had, or he could have had, a lifestyle comparable to anybody else, any other celebrity around the world. It was very bittersweet, and when we were offered the ability to make some good money, we had to turn it down. For safety. It was safety. People wanted to give us money with an agenda behind it. We said no. It was selling your soul. Either you sell your soul or you make a couple of bucks. So the music business was very different. The youth culture, really, even right now, they're completely in the know. They know every single thing. Of course, now with social media, you've got YouTube, you've got Spotify, and everybody's connected. It's just still, it operates like the regular business, like everything else, but they're just not rewarded, unfortunately, what they deserve. Right now, as we know, there's a lot of other bigger, more important problems that's on the platform and what's happening in the region with Iran. So now is not the time to think about that or focus on that, but one day, hopefully, we'll tackle that as well.
In early 2006, Neda was invited on yet another wild experience. This time, she was part of an entourage of 9 perfect strangers who would journey for 2 months across 6,000 kilometers of the Sahara Desert together. The only thing these people had in common was that they had all been impacted by 9/11 and the politics of the Middle East. They were from the USA, Israel, Palestine, Afghanistan, Iran, the Ukraine, and this social experiment, filmed for a documentary called Breaking the Ice, would reveal whether they would find peace by traveling through the desert together in tents and on trucks in a unique sort of reality show format. Next, Neda shares how this experience changed her life forever.
My German Shepherd had just passed. And I was just devastated. And I got a call from my friend, Bronwyn, and she said that there was an opportunity for an expedition across the Sahara Desert. And it was about bringing people from different backgrounds whose lives have changed due to conflict, due to the wars, and due to what had happened also back in 9/11. So being in New York during 9/11, I said, well, what do you have to do? And she's like, well, we can't give you any information about it. You just have to either agree. It's going to be an expedition across the Sahara Desert. Can't tell you where, can't tell you details. Everyone's working on it. No one can know, can't even tell you who's participating. Just, you'll be gone for a couple of months. And at that time, I was like, well, it's a good way to not be home and miss my dog. And of course, it was a peace mission, so something that was intriguing for me. Didn't know. And I said, well, any information? She's like, no, you just have to get your vaccines and get your, shots or whatever else you need for the travel to go into the desert for a couple of months. Didn't tell me anything other than that. This conversation with you is making me realize how many times in my life complete new directions started with, I don't know where I'm going and I don't know where it's going to lead. So she said, I think you'd be great for it. I think it's right up your alley. It's the kind of things you're talking about. It's bringing people from different backgrounds. Well, who? I can't tell you. But where? Which country? I can't tell you. And just these are the dates that you're going to be gone. And I said, okay. And I signed the line and I signed the agreement. And I said, okay, not knowing maybe it's going to be an interesting adventure. Got out in Jordan. I realized that the trip took me to Jordan. And I met the people that were involved, and it was a company from Germany. And then I just watching, observing, saying, what am I doing here? And first time in Jordan, and we were going to go to Petra, and there was going to be like a training on, are we going to be okay with, living in the desert and getting to know each other? And slowly I met about 9 or 10 other people. There was a Ukrainian soldier. And again, this is back in 2006 or something, 2006 or 2007. He was a Ukrainian soldier. It was an American colonel. There was the chief of the New York City Fire Department was there during 9/11, obviously, who were there. And there were 2 Israelis whose lives were, one of them, her mom had passed away in one of the bombings in Israel. The other one was a prisoner of war who was also, a pilot. The other one was the body double for Saddam Hussein's son, which later on, of course, he wrote. The movie was made about him and his life, and there were a couple of books that came out about him. Then there was a Palestinian whose cousin had passed away, who was shot and killed due to the conflict and between Israel and Palestine. We had an Afghan doctor and also the Friday prayer leader in Palestine.
Wow.
And he was with us for a while, but then for the actual long expedition, he wasn't. He stayed back in Palestine. So we had a bunch of, camera and crew people from Germany, the organizers from Germany, from US. It was, a total of 10, 12 people. And everyone's lives somehow had a story connected to the conflict between East and West. And me, being an Iranian American, had 2 different perspectives at that time of things that were going on. So it was interesting. Didn't know anybody. Sat there. We're a little bit standoffish. And as soon as I sat down, actually, it was a funny story. When I saw the Friday prayer leader, with his full garb, and he was just, he was sitting there. And I said, so he's going to be there too? He's going to be traveling too? And he says, yeah. And I said, uh-oh, we're probably going to clash. He's probably not going to approve. It was just 2 women in the entire expedition. It was me, and there was this woman, Galit, from Israel. Didn't know her. So, she was the girl. She was like, we were the other 2 women together. And I didn't know who's going to judge, who's going to be okay, who's not. It was very interesting and strange to begin with. Then I met the Friday prayer, and it was interesting because we didn't hit it off great at the beginning. We were both very standoffish because I'm sure he was looking at me, maybe shaking his head. It's like, you don't look like a practicing Muslim. And I looked at him and I said, God, I hope he's not going to come here and preach me and lecture me. Oh, we also had Tapke, and he was one of the Dalai Lama advised monks to join us to kind of keep the peace between us.
Were you like, what did I just sign up for?
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I was thinking. And I said, well, do they all speak English? Can we all relate with each other? Can we talk? And at the end of the trip, when I met the Friday prayer leader, and we would talk, we got to know each other because we would have long treks, on this German truck that we were in. And then they had this old fire engine truck that they used, and they had this other person. We were all crunched together. He wasn't at all what I expected because of what I witnessed during the beginning of the war in Iran. I had a preconceived idea about any, not just Muslim, but any religious person that's going to be an extremist view. As the trip continued, it would change. People, we got to know each other more. We started having more conversations. And, I talked to him about my life, and he was asking me questions, and I asked about him. And I said, well, how many wives do you have? And he was just kind of looking at me. He goes, no, it's not everybody is like that. And because he had 10 children. I think he had 10 children. And I said, with how many wives? And then he said, with one wife, how many do you need? And I was like, well, some people can marry up to 4 wives in Islam. And he goes, yeah, but that's, I didn't. And I'm okay with so like I would have these moments of, okay, well, that was interesting. Well, that was different. And we started to talk. And I started to see a human being. I started to see a wonderful, loving father. I started to see a man who was constantly talking about his wife. He was funny. He had things to say. He was also dissing himself a few times about their upbringing and their, what their belief system and the quality, their culture. So I saw somebody that was just like us. Okay, like even me who should have known better. Even me, I had my reservation. I'll say this really quick. At the end of that trip, when we separated ourselves, he looked at me and he said, when I first saw you, I thought maybe you're not a good Muslim because I didn't see you observing and I didn't see you really becoming religious. He goes, but now that I've gotten to know you after 2 weeks, he said, maybe you're one of the best Muslims I ever met. He said, the core principles of being a decent human being, I saw all of that in you. Wow. And I turned around and I looked at him and I said, I will never again prejudge somebody based on what I see and how I think, or I think that he's going to be an extremist view. Because after meeting you, I saw that, you're a good man, you're a family man. You were very open. You asked me questions. You understood, even though you didn't agree with some of the things I said, you understood it. And we created at that time, in that moment, we created an authentic friendship, an understanding. Could I go and live with him on his daily lifestyle and, really? Maybe not. We're different countries. Yeah. Listen, after 2 weeks of living in the desert, he was, he had his t-shirt on and his sneakers and everything. I was looking at him. Everybody was dirty. And I looked at him. I'm like, you look like, I'm like, yeah, you look like you could like go on a stage right now and we'll give you a guitar and you'll fit right in. At the end of it, that's how we really all just started like connecting with each other as the person, the human being that we were.
Those stories are the ones that get lost so easily in all the news. And this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you too. Now we're watching the news again. We're seeing people not know where they stand, how to take it. Should they be happy? Should they be upset? Should they be horrified? What do they even do? What's true? What isn't? And that is where the wisdom that you've gained from these trips you've gone, these idealistic experiences you've had, even if they were utopian experiments, like what can we take from that now?
I always talk about someone's potential. And I used to hear that a lot in my life. They're like, stop putting so much focus on people with potential. Sometimes be with people that have reached their potential. But in my mind, I see people and they'll talk or I'll see something in them and I'm like, I see it. I completely see what your potential is. And because at the end of the day, I said, we're all equal. Did someone come up with a better upbringing? Did someone have a better chance? Was somebody more lucky than the other person? Could somebody raise their hand and give a hand the same way that Sheila did to me? You can get very emotional. You can be something that you stand up for. If it's something that's justice or something, you stand up, you talk about it. I get very excited about it. But really, deep down inside, I know I can't really change anyone. No. It doesn't work. But I didn't reach that solution or that conclusion until I was ready for it. My mom could have said something to me 100 times and I didn't hear it until I had to go through my lessons, through my life journey to finally understand it and hear it out.
So many things happened in your life they should never have happened to a child or anyone, innocent civilian, and they did. And what you did with that is, find creativity.
Well, like you just said,
yeah.
The only way to get a clearer picture is to get out of your monologue and get into dialogue. That's where the real story is. Otherwise, there's no movement, there's no river, there's no movement towards, let's see why they think the way they do. Where's that coming from? I'm an Aquarius, right? I sit back and
you've always been so much
this
more
is not
positive.
There's injustice going on here. I have to stand up and say something, even if I'm going to get, whatever, hated at the end.
Well,
And
you
I
have
hated
the
it, you know.
Aquarius gift of like the pause. That's what I've always admired about you. You're like, well, hold on a minute. Like you're actually, you might seem deceptively giving everyone the benefit of the doubt, even the person that doesn't deserve it, which Aquarians can. You really can go into that utopian mindset. Whereas as a Sag, I'll be like, hell no, blah, 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 blah. But you're still listening. You're listening for something that can connect and unify. And like just doing that instead of quickly reacting into the polarizing argument, that's a real gift to be able to do that. And I think it's born of the resilience. My daughter's 15 now. I'm trying to imagine her living in New York City alone completely and going into an office and working.
The Aquarian, I mean, first of all, we're always curious, right?
Hmm.
As an Aquarius, you're always curious. There'll always be something about everyone that we can relate with.
Yeah,
That's why we have such a crazy, kooky circle of friends. I mean,
you
I don't know
really
if you remember
do.
my parties in New York. My parties were out of this
They
world.
were some of the most eclectic people ever, and I loved that. Loved going to those parties
And
and
of
meeting
course, I
those people.
love bringing them together, introducing them to each other. You know, I love networking. I love bringing people, but also it's that thing that you're saying is it feels like, you know, it's always like we're a live wire inside of us.
Hmm.
And we're trying to we activate that wire of electricity, trying to find something inside of you, that other wire to connect with, and it's like, oh, okay, we're connected. There's
Yeah.
something about her that I can connect with. There's something about this person. I don't agree with them, but there's got to be something there
And
that we
that's
got to get
probably what
along
we
with.
had to do in our childhoods to survive. It was a survival skill. I have
Yeah.
never been in a room full of people that were quote unquote all like me in terms of their background. There's always only at most half of me because my parents grew up in different countries and cultures. So the only room of people that I ever feel like everyone is just like me is like a bunch of people who don't fit in anyway, like a room
The
full of
misfits.
weirdos and misfits. I believe we're in the unfolding age of Aquarius, and like I really do want to celebrate, like go out and proactively become a misfit. Like what we had to do, which was rough at times in our childhood, but also an amazing gift in the end. You know, what we traded in a sense of belonging and ease, we made up for in like having to get scrappy and find ways to connect with the communities, peers, whoever we were around, like to fight, to keep, to let
What an
Sheila give
interesting
you that
point.
job. I
What
need
an
this job.
interesting point. I mean, what you
Mhm.
just said really just struck with me because, you know, with us and our generation, and of course, you know, growing up in our eclectic backgrounds and New York City,
Mhm.
um, yeah, we were being a misfit was celebrated.
Yeah.
You know, the crazier, kookier circle of people that you were, you know, it was celebrated. Somehow, it seems like society with social media, with business, it's creating this mentality of, you know, just everyone trying to look the same, to have the same, to want the same things. The, you know, the end goal is to make a lot of money, buy a lot of expensive things, live in a great place, which is great. I'm not arguing. I'd like that too, for the record. You know, I have, I
Yeah,
have no,
we spent a lot of time talking about our hair before we started recording this and complimenting each other's makeup. So, this is the realness of what
ain't
friendship
nothing
is
wrong with that,
about.
sister. But yeah, but it's interesting because we were misfit. I don't think misfits are celebrated now. You know, sometimes, you know, maybe be rude or I don't know if I can say this. You know, if you're an asshole, you
Go
know, you're
for it.
cool to watch. If you're an asshole, you can be a cool to watch, or maybe you'll get more views, or maybe you'll get, you know, I get the wow or the wow factor or the, you know, the cute. I get that. But
Yeah.
they aren't, even those guys aren't really the misfits that they were. The ones that we grew up with, the ones that created the crazy music, the ones
Yeah.
that created the amazing movies in Hollywood, the ones that went out there and created this amazing fashion and
The ones
writing,
that
the
were
books.
recording their Persian poetry on top of beats in
Yes, there was,
an
there, you had to
underground
be,
room with no windows that I remember you meeting
yes,
him in the
yeah,
documentary.
this
Those
little
are
hidden
like,
underground place.
You know what I think happens is that there are the misfits and the creatives and the creators, and they are out there being themselves. And then what's happened is that a government that represents their nationality or culture goes and does something terrible. And then all of a sudden, it's all over the news, and we go into what's called the Cartman drama triangle, where you're either the hero, the victim, or the perpetrator, the villain.
Hmm,
And we're
interesting.
stuck in this giant triangle. We've got America, Iran, and Israel, where we have parts of our identities from between the two of us, switching those places. I know that Israel is complicated. I don't feel safe just advertising that that's where my dad grew up because it's so loaded and there is so much to be upset about. There's so much horrible stuff that the government is doing to the Palestinians and in Iran now. And it's just like,
Hey,
that's not
listen,
me.
we're used to it. We're used to it. We've been used to people saying, "You from where? You
Yeah,
from
well,
what?"
exact.
Welcome to the
Welcome to
conversation, you know?
exactly. With all of this, Netta and I reflected on what hope could look like through dialogue.
The new misfits in our time right now are the truth seekers.
Mm, I love that.
You know, we're the if you're a truth seeker and if you're not an automatic follower, you're a misfit.
Yeah.
And the good thing about the
Yeah.
misfit is most often it's the misfit that goes off the path and finds a new path
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, yeah, I'm bored of this one. They're the ones that are go into the jungle and create a new path for everybody else to follow. It was always them who created new music, new thoughts, almost everything. You have to be a
Mm-hmm.
misfit. And what does that mean? What does that mean? It means to trust yourself, to be curious, and to explore what your curiosity takes you towards
Yeah.
without apology. I'm curious about this. I want to learn about this person, that faith, this, community, this country. And this is not what I heard. So it must be something new. So now, I'm a truth seeker. And as a truth seeker, you become this misfit. And as misfits go, people are going to fight you. People are going to disagree with you. Literally, you may have to, be up against a lot of you have to put on a huge suit of armor. You got to be tough and because people don't want to be different. People don't want to
Mm.
change. People don't want their views changed. It's I've had conversations when I'll say something that I know shifted them, and they were like, no, 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 okay, okay, I don't want to hear it. Anyway, quickly change the subject because
Yeah.
something was about to shift in there, and they did not want to let go of that story.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know,
Well, that's what I've heard that people get so invested, their identity gets wrapped up in that belief. And so it's really hard for them to let go of that because they feel that they're going to lose a sense of selfhood. They have misidentified. Also, I think that there's a trust issue. When I hear the words regime change, for example, what does that even mean? Does this mean that we're actually disrupting an entire system at the core, or does it mean we're just replacing one ideology with another, but we're still coming from the same place of there's one head, one guru, one
same play,
leader.
different characters.
Exactly. So those are not misfits, even if they're touting another ideology.
No, who is the misfit is the one that questions that and says, "Hey, listen, have you guys noticed that we're all going the same merry-go-round?
Yeah.
And let's just stop and come up with something completely new." That's the misfit, and they're
Yeah.
going to get fought for it. And listen, that new, maybe it's wrong direction. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't what it was supposed to be. Maybe, but you got to try it. As an expat, it's in the diaspora. My entire life, I grew up in America. When shit hits the fan, they'll always look at me as, but you're also Iranian.
Mm.
Because at the end, there's like a little small piece of you that is different. In Iran, no one can come and say, well, they own you, you're one of ours, because I'm an American. My culture, my upbringing, my pop culture, everything is through my upbringing in America.
Yeah.
So they will always look at me as an Iranian who, when shit hits the fan, they'll say, yeah, but you didn't grow up here. Not just Iranians, but expats in any country around the world. We're always trying to find out, who do we belong
Yeah.
to?
And if you're a misfit and you're listening to this, turn that into your superpower if you haven't yet. Elevate the voices of other misfits. reflect on the stories and the wisdom that you have, the unique lens that you have to open the eyes and mind of someone who isn't a misfit in the same way that you are. I mean, as we learned in that class where we met, everyone feels like a misfit at the end of the day. But not everyone had the same experiences that we did of it. Some people felt like misfits because they looked like everybody else, but maybe they were in a family that was very religious or had traditions or values that they didn't share because of the soul they were born as.
Right,
There's
right.
always that too. Probably I found astrology so intriguing because it was like, well, you can't simply define who someone is based on 3D world identity politics, their nationality, their religion, their sex, their race, their this. There is a soul in there and an astrological chart. There's a soul that chose to incarnate and be born and has as much opportunity as the next to bring illumination to this planet and
Absolutely.
unity and truth seeking.
Maybe we're going to bring back Misfits again. Maybe
Yeah.
the idea is to turn on your Misfit button,
Mm-hmm.
and it be original. Because,
Yes.
I mean, I don't know. Is it just me, or does it feel like everything is becoming cookie cutter?
It has. I mean, that's what the algorithm is supposed to do. It wants to know. This is what AI and large language
And
models
it
are
keeps you
doing.
there. It keeps you there.
That's the problem. It's like the pattern recognition. I mean, that's what astrology is. That's how our subconscious works. We are wired for pattern recognition. But when you have machines that are doing pattern recognition without the human soul, it's what you just said. It wants to keep us there, which will isolate us from each other, and we have to
It's
break that
safe.
algorithm, just like you did by going into Iran with your camera, with your curiosity, following serendipity, allowing yourself to be guided, and then you emerged
A whole
with
world opened up for me.
yeah, I have all the astrology for it for anyone who's listening who's interested in that. Typically, our podcast is about astrology, and we did an episode on some of the astrology of Iran last week, too. But like, I didn't want this to be about that. I wanted this to be a human story of someone who is connected, representing it in the way that you do, but has also the unique misfit lens.
Here's something that I just declared for myself as I'm talking to you. I want to be a misfit, and my new misfit is about pushing hate out of my vision, out of my heart. Right now, it's so easy to become looking at what's happening in the
Mm-hmm.
news, what's going on with Iran, what's going on, you know, with the regime. Is it going to be a regime change? Is it going to be, the monarchists are going to come in? Is it going to be no regime change? Is it America and Israel? I have my opinions, and I get disappointed, and I'm disgusted at war. I've been talking against war my whole life. Many
Yeah.
times I was celebrated for standing up and speaking up. Now some people are attacking me for why I'm still standing up and saying no to war, that's not the answer, because they're thinking that, oh, you must be a regime supporter if you don't want this war. I don't want war. I don't want people getting killed. I don't want
Yeah.
hatred to be the reason. I don't want to create more separation. And that's who I've been. I don't want to apologize for that. And I think with what you just said is my misfit moment is that I'm not going to let hate take over me, especially at a time like now when everybody is giving me a reason to want to hate something or someone outside of who I am. It's not easy. And I do get angry, and I do get upset, and I do get disappointed and disgusted at some of the things that I see on social media from all sides. But that's the possibility that I'm going to
That's
walk into right
powerful.
now, is to be a misfit and try not to follow the herd of people that just want to stay angry and be hateful.
And you called it a declaration, and it's a declaration of independence from hate. Thank you, Netta, for being a friend, ally, and amazing Aquarius soul.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for letting me speak to your peeps. I would love to get more American, more English speaking people into my page. I would love for people to start dialoguing with each other, have
We'll
different
share
opinions in
all of
there.
your links and all of the ways that people can follow you and connect with you. And
At a time right now when it seems like the whole world's blowing up, there's bombs going off right this minute when you and I are talking. All of that is happening. Sometimes it's bigger than me. It's bigger than me trying to come up with what's happening and what the solution is and what's going to happen. But alongside that, at that same exact moment, there's an Iranian American who was born a Muslim, who's talking to, another American, Israeli, Jewish background. We may not be the right representative
so
as
maybe that's
far as
exactly why we are, because we're not nationalistic. We're not apologists for the government. We see responsibility.
from one human to another, one
Yeah,
heart to another heart. Hopefully, that's what the world's going to be about. Get to know someone that you normally wouldn't, become friends with somebody that you normally would never, under normal circumstances, do. And then we can say that in the midst of so much anger and hate and war, we were able to be part of something nicer, kinder.
absolutely. Let's
A
build
real
something
way.
new.
I love you, Ophi.
Love you too. And
But thank you so much for giving me a chance to share my story again and remember some good, fond memories. Love you. Take care. Bye.
thank you so much for doing something different with me and joining me for the special On This Planet episode of AstroTwins Radio. We've been talking about astrology this entire century and will continue to do so. But we really appreciate that you took the time to get to know me and Neda from a different point of view, two people from two cultures that aren't quote unquote supposed to get along. Our 24-year friendship, starting in the 2002 year of the water horse, connecting here in 2026 in the year of the fire horse. Come and run with us. Let's be misfits together. You can check the show notes to watch the trailer for Nobody's Enemy. Follow Neda on Instagram, YouTube, and on her website, and subscribe to her upcoming podcast. I'll see you on our next episode of AstroTwins Radio. Peace, love, and friendship to you all.